Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn. On this episode, we're going to celebrate the legacy and greatness of Loaf. Loaf passed away yesterday at the age of 74. I'm very sorry to hear that. My condolences to Meat's family, friends, and fans. Lots of great things to talk about Meat and his wonderful career. Why don't we jump in and get started celebrating his great legacy? Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn. Once again, I have with me my partner in crime, my buddy, Mr. Vincent LaRussa. How are we doing today, pal?
Not great. You know,
Yeah.
when we do these episodes, it's never puts any of us music fans, music lovers in a good mood. When somebody passes who is somebody who was, for me too, influential on my musical journey throughout my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll get to that. I'll let you do the setup
Yeah,
for this whole
no,
thing.
I woke up this morning, New York time at 7 o'clock, and I saw the news right away. And I was both surprised and not surprised. I remember seeing him on TV last year sometime, and he looked a little bit old and, you know, frail. And I was like, oh, wow, Meatloaf doesn't seem like his better days are behind him, so to say. But saying that, I had not heard anything about him being sick. So I just assumed, as we all are, he was getting older, and that was that. But so I was a little bit surprised when I read about it this morning. What about you? Were you surprised, or did you hear anything about him being sick?
I didn't hear anything about him being sick, but now I've come to find out that I guess he died of COVID, complications due to COVID.
Yeah, I've
That
seen that a few times. Yeah.
a couple of days ago, maybe more than a couple of days ago, he wasn't feeling well. I think he was supposed to make an appearance, and
Mm-hmm.
it had to get canceled because of that. But at least from what I heard on the news this morning, or whether it's TMZ or one of those things,
Yep.
announced that he died due to COVID complications due to COVID. So it's, again, with this whole thing with COVID,
Yep.
it's just another, I don't know what do you even say?
Yeah. No, and I respectfully ask everybody who's watching this not to make it political comments and all of that about it. Like you said, I've read that a few times as well, that he's passed from COVID. The family did not say that. The family just said they were by his side the last 24 hours before his passing. But I've read that a few times, and usually, where there's smoke, there's fire, and I'm sure that there's probably a lot of truth to that. It's unfortunate. It's just, another rose from the last 2 years of tough times for all of us. And, sadly, it seems like that kind of led to Meatloaf's passing, which is very unfortunate. But,
Yeah.
I also had read that he was supposed to be going into the studio in January, this month, to start recording. I think it was like 6 or 7 new songs. And from what I can gather, they actually never started the recording, which is unfortunate, because it would have been nice if they had 2 songs done or whatever. And there could have been like a final song or 2 from him. But it seems like those recordings never actually started, which is unfortunate from a music side, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, it's funny. For me, and, I know he's influenced your music, and we'll talk about that. For me, I have early memories from even the 70s, as a lot of people do with Meatloaf, and in part probably because my parents, at the time I was just a kid, 7, 8 years old, but I know my parents had that Bat Out of Hell album, and just as a kid, that album cover always drew me in. I'm like, man, that looks cool. That looks cool. And then, of course, Paradise by the Dashboard Life, 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad. Those are always on the radio. Yeah, so there you have it.
I mean, let's see if I can get around. See my ring light on somewhere. but anyways,
Yep.
but yeah, it kind of is also reminds you of like the album covers that the Kiss was putting out. Obviously, it's not
Yeah.
Kiss, but
Right.
just obviously it's a painting, and it's just imagery that you'll just never forget,
Agreed.
It's I saw one of my friends had posted that they weren't allowed to get the record as a kid because their parents or their mom didn't, approve of the album cover. So it just goes to show how that was
right.
something that prohibited him getting the record cover.
Which is interesting because
like record album, I should say.
As a kid, that drew me in. And while you're showing yours, I'll show. This is actually my parents' album, and I was fortunate. You can see on the bottom there. I don't know. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I actually got that signed by him through the mail, through a company last year. So it was less than a year ago that he was doing a public signing. And I was like, this is such a classic album. He's such an icon. I got to get something signed for him. So I'm actually really glad I did that. I said to a friend of mine, my friend Ed, who actually tipped me off that he was doing this, that could have been his last public signing that he did, because it was only like 6-7 months ago that I got that signed. So I'm thankful for that. But what a great album cover. Love that album cover.
Yeah, this happens to be a nice price, which was something I think they were doing in the 80s.
Yep.
And it's got you can see there, that's like the Sam Goody.
Yeah.
I think that store exists anymore.
No, I don't think so either.
Of course, it's still in the shrink wrap. It's open, but
okay, so you did open. Good.
And I always called this the Michael Jackson epic label.
Yep. Yep.
Obviously, he wasn't the only one, but the original, excuse me, the original epic label was a orange color classic. That's if you have an original print.
Right. I don't have the vinyl inside of that. I'll have to dig out the vinyl and see.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it is original print.
And what's interesting about it is that it's on Epic, but it's on Cleveland International Records. And the great thing I wanted to talk about Meatloaf and his career is that basically for 2 years they pitched this record, and record companies basically laughed and said, "What are we going to do with a guy called Meatloaf?" Like,
right.
Just think of the name Meatloaf. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But from what I come to understand, that they had these demos. Jim Steinman, which also should be mentioned, he was a songwriter, who then went on to produce and write songs like "Total Eclipse of the Heart," that song for Celine Dion. What the heck was that song?
I'm trying to think of it now. And Meatloaf, I think, actually recorded it after Celine did.
Yeah. But he wrote also for Air Supply, "Making Love Out of Nothing at All." But he had a bunch of other hits. And clearly, when you hear those songs, you know they're Jim Steinman.
Agreed.
It just has his sound. But I don't want to make this about Jim Steinman. But it should be mentioned that Todd Rundgren, who actually then, I guess, got the demos, and then they basically recorded the album, and that's what they were basically pitching. So from what I understand, I could be wrong on this. I remember seeing the VH1 behind the music when those, I used to love those.
Yes.
They basically had the album recorded, and they were going to all the labels with the production done by Todd. I could be wrong. I know Super M is a big Todd Rundgren guy.
I'll say this, because I think that you're right, and maybe you can look up what that Celine Dion song is, because it's driving me crazy, right? But they were actually writing that album for 5 years, I believe, and then pitching it, like you said, for 2 years. So it's all
coming back. It's all coming back to me now.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
That's a Celine Dion song.
Yes, it is. Yes, absolutely. But even when the album was first released, like you said, like people didn't know what to do with it, and I think it was close to a year from the time the album was released until it finally took off. Which is, you would think a lot of record companies by that point would be like, we didn't know what to do with this guy to begin with. The album's not taking off, and just kind of can it. But it just shows you, like, in some ways, the power of that music. And it was interesting. I was actually reading about this today. We know it's one of the best-selling albums of all time, right? So there's no disputing that. It's still, to this day, in Australia, the best-selling album of all time. Not like one of the best. It is, in Australia, the best-selling album of all time. And it shows you just like how this guy who's overweight, maybe not your typical rock star look to him, worldwide, the impact that album and then his entire career had is just, second to hardly anybody, really. It's incredible.
Well, first of all, you start off an album with a song that's almost 10 minutes long.
Right.
I mean, even at that point, you're trying to keep hit songs or singles like around 3 minutes long.
Yep.
So even that for a record company say, wait a second. All right. So the title track's going to be 10 minutes long. Like
right.
we just don't do that,
Yep.
For new artists, once you become Pink Floyd or a band like that and you have an established base, you could do basically whatever you want. The record
right. Or your Led Zeppelin with Stairway to Heaven or something like that. Right.
So, and then you have, songs like You Took the Words Out of My Mouth, 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad, Paradise by Death. Those were like the quote singles, sure. I believe, of the record. Mm-hmm. But even still, for album at that point, which, and I think this came out in 77, the record.
Yep, 77.
So around that time, you got to remember Saturday Night Fever was out, which at one point in time was, I think, the biggest selling record. So you had these two monster records coming out. But I guess what's amazing about it, it's not like a Michael Jackson Thriller, which it had a huge hit in like a Beat It or a Billie Jean. You know what I mean? So for an album to sell that much, with, I don't know what they went to. I mean, I guess I could look up like what 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad went to. It went to number Hot 100, number 11. So it wasn't a number one song. Yep. All right.
I mean, to me, the song "Paradise by the Dashboard Light's" the one that even to this day you still hear. That's the all-time classic from that album to me.
And on the Hot 100, it only hit 39. So
amazing.
Again,
amazing.
Right. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is this isn't an album that yielded 3, 4 number one singles like a Michael Jackson, Madonna record or whoever. But still, it just sold so many. I think it. I forgot what the number was. I think it was something like 35 million in the U.S. or something like that.
Right.
Or no. I think what I heard was it's 35. It's in the 35 most sold albums of all time.
Yeah. But I think you aren't far off. I don't know, have it off the top of my head, but it's something like 35, 40 million copies sold. I mean, look, whatever the actual number is, it's almost immaterial. Like you said, it was one of the best-selling albums of all time. It's not like it was loaded with 7 number one hits like Thriller. It just was really a masterpiece. And unlike anything else that really came before, to some degree, even after it. I know he did Bat Out of Hell 2, 3, or whatever. But this is the original, and that original is really just, I mean, it stood the test of time. It's 40 years almost we're coming up on that album. And since more than 40 years. So it's just incredible.
And just, because I like to bash, sometimes I got to bash fucking Rolling Stone, And listen, I grew up not knowing as much as the political bullshit of that magazine.
Right. Yep.
But Rolling Stone, I see under reception for the record.
Let's hear this.
Let me just read this.
Yeah.
The album was not an immediate hit in the U.S. Reviews were initially mixed, but since have become much positive. Unrelieved, Dave Marsh, which should be called Dave Harsh, review in Rolling Stone called the song swell, but entirely mannered and derivative, and noted that the arrangements,
derivative,
and noted that the arrangements aren't bad, and commended the musicians. At least he did that.
All right.
He concluded by noting that the principals have some growing to do. I mean, now think about the overall, like the production of the record, the songwriting, how unique, I mean, I don't know, maybe he was overdosing on a Grateful Dead record at the time. I don't know, but it just goes to show you, look, we all at some point in time, listen, I'll be the first one. I'll raise my hand. I heard Appetite for Destruction in your house and you start playing it. I was like, get this record off. I couldn't.
Right. And I was like, what are you thinking? This is great. Right.
Yeah.
But that's just personal opinions and taste. And I can live with somebody saying Bat Out of Hell is not a great album. You're entitled to that opinion. Derivative.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me just say,
groundbreaking.
I quickly, changed my course on that Appetite of Destruction.
You did. Yes, you did.
It only took about a week. So let me just say that.
It did, but I won't let you live down that week.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Like some other things, Peter Chris. So
Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah. Well, that Phantom of the Opera, you went without telling me, and I started thinking about that after our last thing. I think you snuck away for that one.
I snuck away. Well, we were bringing up Kiss here, and I do want to bring up the Kiss connection with the Bat Out of Hell album tour, really, and that is, and I'm sure Kiss fans notice, Bob and Bruce were the guitar players on that tour. And I would say this, if you haven't checked it out, and I don't know if you've checked this out, there's a great pro shot that you could find from Germany, 78, and it's got Bob and Bruce on it. It's a great show. It's a great, time capsule of that album and that tour, whatever. And it's kind of interesting, obviously Bob passed a couple of years ago and we did our tribute to him, but just being involved, even just from a touring aspect with an album like this for both Kulick brothers is just a phenomenal thing. So I wanted to bring up that Kiss connection since we kind of veered off there for a moment.
I think that's when Bruce had like the afro. He had
a mustache and an afro. Mustache. So but hey, he was young, good for him landing a gig like that.
And let's not forget, I mean, in the 70s, especially, I know years later he had lost weight, Meatloaf, but he was a big dude.
Yep.
And to go out, I mean, I can't think of how many frontmen look like Meatloaf. You know what I mean? But look at his performance. We talked the other day about Paul Stanley. Gene Simmons said he's the best frontman ever. I mean, I'm not saying Meatloaf is one of the best, but I'm just saying because of his size, because of everything this guy put, everything. I mean, I know he would say he would be physically exhausted after a show because he gave everything. And let's not also forget, and this is later in life for me, I became a huge fan of the Rocky Horror Picture Show movie. I never got it as a kid. I remember when we lived in Brooklyn over at the was it the Marlboro Theater that was on? Yeah. And they used to run that at night. I think maybe it was Saturday nights or Friday nights. I forget. And I always thought it was like, I was like, oh, this must be some horror movie. I had no idea, even like as a 16-year-old. But later in life with DVD, I watched it and then come to find out before he was famous as Meatloaf, he was in this movie and some great vocal performances in that.
Yeah. And you just hit on a key thing. I remember as a teenager thinking, oh, they put him in the movie to capitalize on his celebrity status of Bat Out of Hell, but it was actually the other way around. He was in the movie first, which I only learned when I got a little bit older in life. As a kid, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
So people who haven't ever seen that movie, I mean, it's an acquired taste maybe, but you should check that out.
Agreed.
Again, great songs. I think it's a great songs from that soundtrack, great performances. And then what was it, in around 90, 91, he had a Bat Out of Hell 2. Well, and he had some records in between.
Yeah, but before you do that, so you were talking about 75, which is when the Rocky Horror Picture Show came out. I'm sure a lot of rock fans noticed this, but in 76, again, before Bat Out of Hell came out, he was on a Ted Nugent album. And he sang 5 songs on a Ted Nugent album. Derek St. Holmes had left for a little bit. So it's kind of fascinating, again, that Ted would take this, relatively speaking, unknown singer, right, and then put him on his album for 5 of the songs there, which, again, I think about, like you said before, them shopping this album and, again, kind of looking at it now all these years later, he was right on that edge between the Rocky Horror Picture Show, singing with Ted Nugent. I have to wonder sometimes, what were these record labels thinking that they were all turning down this album? Because again, it's easy to say now because these songs are such classics, but again, I hear those songs and it's just, there's something there to me that wasn't anyplace else. And you were talking about him as a stage performer. And I agree with you. I'm not going to say he's the greatest front man or he's in top 10, but he had a certain stage presence to him, right? Different than being a front man. He had a stage presence that in my mind was very unique. Even like I was mentioning that video, when you watch videos of him and his big, heavy guy, sweaty, hair, like all like ratty looking or whatever. Yeah. So like opposite of David Lee Roth, let's just say, who was all the women like, oh my God, Dave. Here is this guy that just like an everyday type of person, just a big heavyweight type person. I have to wonder sometimes, how did the record labels not see this? But, again, easy to say, I guess, 40 plus years later.
Well, I mean, we've heard so many stories of some of the biggest bands of all time that got rejected by multiple labels. I mean,
well, the Beatles got rejected. So if the Beatles guy, I guess, could get rejected.
Exactly. So it's much easier for us to play armchair quarterback now about this stuff. But depending on what was kind of in style or what the labels were looking for at the time, or if they were going to the right labels. But the fact of the matter is, Epic, finally decided to take a chance or whatever on them. And thankfully we got Meatloaf music in our lives. And it's kind of funny. I heard about, Meatloaf, like, how did this guy become Meatloaf? And as I think the story went when he was born and his father saw him as a baby. He said he described him as being something, meat was something. He said he used the word, and he made the hospital put on, in the not the crib, whatever they're called. You can tell they never had kids. Whatever the thing is, they put the baby
bassinet.
in
The bassinet.
Yeah. And they actually had the hospital put meat on the side of it.
Really? See, I never heard that. I always thought it was one of his high school coaches that gave him the nickname Meatloaf.
Well,
okay.
Coach added the loaf.
The coach added the loaf.
He was meat. He was meat until he played football. Then he became the loaf. It was Meatloaf.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So yes, he was. Yeah. So his father nicknamed him. I think he was. I think there's actually, I saw an interview where Meatloaf actually says I was at 4 days old. I was nicknamed Meat in the hospital.
Okay, I never recognized that. I knew the coach story. I didn't know the first part of it. And everybody watching, listening, it's two separate words: meat loaf. It's not one word. I just have to say that because I see sometimes people type it meatloaf, all one word. I'm like, no, no, it's two words. Look, you're looking at the album, like,
because when you look at the album and you just see Meatloaf on this cover, you just got to think. I mean, what a classic name! Like
it is. It is
Meatloaf. You know what I mean?
It is. It's great. It's great. I love it.
But,
I absolutely love it. So you were talking about then I'll say the second go around. You started bringing that up, but then I cut you off there for a moment. Which to me, it's amazing. In some ways, the second go around for him was more amazing than the first, because how many artists 15, 20 years later come back, another number one hit song. And I think, we're talking about I'll Do Anything for Love, but I Won't Do That. I think that's his best-selling single of all time. It hit number one on 17 different charts around the world. I mean, that's incredible to think about 15 years later, that he had even greater success the second go around, which to me is just, I mean, he won a Grammy, I think, for that song. It's just freaking phenomenal to me that happened all those years later.
Yeah. And it should be noted, he had, 3 or 4 albums in between that. Bad for the Good and Dead Ringer in 81, Midnight at the Lost and Found in 83. Then he went to Arista Records and had Bad Attitude and Blind Before I Stop. And also, he had a dispute with Jim Steinman at some point, and Midnight at the Lost and Found, I believe, was the record. And Jim Steinman wound up putting out a record, a solo record of songs that were supposed to be for Meatloaf. And it's kind of an interesting record. First of all, it's an interesting album cover for you, and I have it somewhere in this, it's kind of like, I don't know, the guy who did the artwork for like Bat Out of Hell. I don't know. It's not like I could tell you who did the cover for Destroy, and you could say
Ken Kelly.
Right. So I don't know the gentleman's name, or maybe it was a female who did it. But it's interesting listening to that record that Jim Steinman put out, because it's Steinman singing, and come on, now you're singing songs that Meatloaf was, and Jim Steinman was an okay singer, but he's no Meatloaf.
And, I want to pause you. That's one of the things to me that's overlooked. And we were talking about like his stage presence. Is look, he's got a damn great voice to me, Meatloaf. I mean, I love his voice. But
the interesting thing about the 83 record, Midnight at the Lost and Found, the 2 songs that he had on that record for Meat was Total Eclipse of the Heart and Making Love Out of Nothing at All, which was the big
amazing
air supply. So think about how big that record could have been. I mean, those are 2, those are great songs. They're not even like, I mean, Total Eclipse of the Heart was a huge, tremendous song. You know what I mean? So absolutely. I think I also remember, seeing an interview with Meatloaf kind of like rolling his eyes, like, yeah, that song should have been mine. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, think about it. It's 1983. You had, in 1977, one of the biggest records. You've put out a couple of records since then, and all of a sudden this other artist gets a huge hit that you feel like should have been yours,
Sure.
And it took him, 14 years or whatever it is to recover. Until actually Bat Out of Hell 3. Now look, it's 93. I thought it was 91. It was 93. So
93, right. That's when I'll Do Anything for Love came out in 93, right?
Yeah. So that's more than 15 years.
Which again, I just want to put this in context. Think about this also. So that song became, like I said, his biggest hit of all time. All these years later, during the peak of grunge.
That's true.
Think about that,
That's
right?
true.
So you have Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all that on the radio, and then Meatloaf comes back again with, and I love the album version of that song. I know it's not what they played on the radio, but I was just listening to it probably 2-3 weeks ago.
What song?
I'll Do Anything for Love.
I was getting my ADD kicked in.
That's okay.
I was thinking of something else.
No, it's 12 minutes long. I mean, it was just like 2-3 weeks ago. I was listening to this again. I was like, that's just the original album recorded version is incredible to me.
So I remember getting the cassette because at that point, 93 albums were out of favor. And I remember loving the song, but I remember even as my early years of writing songs, I would never ever think, because I don't know how many times they say it, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. It might be 155 times. If I was writing songs, I would never have the balls to keep saying the same long. And it's a 12-minute version of a song, but it just goes to show you, first of all, I don't know how much I know. Secondly, again, at this point, you're putting out a record. There's been no success since 77, basically. It's 1993. And you're going to put out a single for 12 minutes, repeating the same lyric a lot. But Meatloaf and Steinman, who produced the record, wrote the song, as far as I know. I think it's all credited to him. Yes,
I think you're right.
Credited to him. And and there's also, what is that? What is that? It's like ambiguity, the ambiguity of what is that? But
I think that's part of the brilliance of the song to me. And you're talking about them repeating it over and over again, and I love that they got like the piano thing going, and just like that tension of him keeps saying it. It's like to me that's part of the allure of the song, and that's why I love the 12. I know the radio version was like 4 minutes, like you said. All singles have to be like 4 minutes, but I love that album version. If you've only heard the radio version and you're watching this, check out the album version. Much different, much longer. To me, it's epic. It's great.
And I'm going to tell you something that I'm sure you don't know.
Go ahead.
Educate me. Very bold.
Educate me.
So there's a Kiss connection to that song.
To that song.
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know if I know this.
You
Who's
don't?
the drummer on the song? I'm gonna guess it's something like that. Okay.
Close.
Who played bass?
Steve Buslow, who played bass on Paul Stanley's solo album. Played bass guitar on that song.
I did not know.
There's always like a Kiss connection.
There always is, right?
And it should be noted, that the original Bat Out of Hell had a lot of Springsteen's E Street Band playing, or it's got Roy Bittan on the piano and Max Weinberg, who played drums on that. So just want to, and how can we forget the Scooter?
That's right. Well, I was going to say that.
Yeah.
And that was part of the allure for me as a kid. And again, I was a Yankee fan in 77, 78, living in New York. And I did not get what the reference was in Paradise by the Dashboard Light at all. I was just like, oh, they have Phil Rizzuto in the middle of a song. That's cool.
So what is the reference?
Gee, I don't know. First base, second base, third base, going home. But you know what? It's funny. I'll share this as a kid. When I was 8 years old and that song came out, I was always like, when she goes, stop right there. I was like, but did he score? Did he did they win the game? Like that's
score was the right word. But did he score? As a
but
kid,
in my mind, I wanted to know, was he safe or out at the plate? And I did not get the reference. And I used to think that was from a real baseball game and they just inserted it. And I was like, I gotta find what game that was. But you know what? Phil Rizzuto supposedly was upset. He did not know what that song was about and how that was going to be used in this song. Again, now as an adult and you're doing that, you kind of have to say, hold on a second, what's this song about here? This is a rock and roll song. As an 8-year-old kid, I get a pass for thinking it's really a baseball game, but as an adult, he should have known better. So, but no, that's classic. I love that. He's sliding first, he's sliding second, he's safe, no, he's out. No, wait, safe at second base. That's great.
Brilliant. It's brilliant.
It's absolutely brilliant.
It's brilliant.
Love it.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to downplay Todd Rundgren's contribution. He played guitar on the record. I believe he brought in the drummer, a gentleman named Willie Wilcox, who played with him in a lot of the Utopia stuff that he did, and his solo stuff. I mean, this is it's a tremendous loss.
We were showing our albums. I don't know if you know this. Did you know I don't know if you, could you see that? In 2019, I went to see Bat Out of Hell, the musical
I
on
didn't even know that
Broadway.
existed.
Yeah, so it was actually really cool. It was his songs in a musical. When was this? August to September 2019 in New York. So I went to that in 2019, and he wasn't in the play, but it was all like the songs, all the classic Meatloaf
Nope.
songs. And it was, I know he did show up at one of the performances one time. I think he sang Anything for Love, which would have been incredible if I was there for that.
Yeah.
But you know, it was a really good play, and I got that signed as well because I was like, oh, it was a fun night out.
Is that after you saw Debbie Gibson the musical?
The same night, actually, I went from one to the other. You're laughing, but you know, I'm a pop guy, and I never had a problem. I never had a problem with Debbie Gibson, but no, I did not see that.
I'm sorry. It's either Debbie Gibson or Tiffany I was going to mention, but
I always liked Debbie Gibson better than Tiffany, but that's just
listen. This is coming from a guy who's got the Donnie Most solo album. You know me, I buy crap. You know what I mean? And I love nostalgia. So
yes,
again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but
no, that's all fun. But no, that was a great play. I was so glad I got to see that. I'm wondering if somewhere along the way, if they'll resurrect that now, since obviously Meatloaf, with him passing, won't be touring anymore. Will that be one way to kind of keep his legacy and their music? Because Jim's gone also as well. So is that a way to keep their music alive still? I'll be curious to see if that picks up again.
Yeah, I kind of forgot that. I just looked on that. He died last year.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully the two of them are up in heaven, right in the next hit song that we'll all hear when we get up there, right?
Yeah.
I just want to mention also the one other thing. We're talking about the music, which is really at the end of the day what Meatloaf's going to be remembered most for. But he also was in like over 50 different movies. And I'll say this, he was in 50 different movies that ranged from like Wayne's World to Spice World. He was in both of those, which is just freaking incredible to me. So, none of them were ever like the number one movies in a box office, but he was in, I think, over 50 movies, which is freaking incredible.
Wow. That I had no idea about.
Yeah.
I had no idea about.
I know one of the ones that I see people reference the most is Fight Club with Brad Pitt. And I'll be honest, I've never seen it. Those types of movies are usually not my thing, but it's like this big underground cult favorite that people seem to speak very highly of. So maybe I'll have to check that out. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't think this is really a bold statement. I think Meatloaf was a guy who changed the trajectory of the music business and music in general. I think he's.
You mean so he wasn't derivative?
Ridiculous.
It is. I'm sorry. I had to say that one more time.
Yeah. I don't think this is a guy who'll ever go into a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Although, let's not get into that conversation right now. That's a discussion I've been wanting to have with you for another day because I have some really strong opinions about some stuff. I know. I don't mean to go off on this, but I know Ted Nugent's come out with a couple of things he said recently about that, which a lot of it I do agree with him about.
Okay.
I know Ted could be very strong in his opinions and his beliefs and stuff like that, but put that aside for now.
Well, we already debated Ted Nugent, me, you, Mike Brunn, and Mark Cicchini like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago at this point on an episode. So people could check that out and they'll hear my opinion on that. I won't go through that again, but perhaps we'll have to revisit that conversation again 2 years later.
And again, that conversation is more about not so much him being about it, because even in, I think his latest statement, he's even saying, I'm not even saying that I should be in it per se, but these other artists, how are they not in?
Yep.
Let's put that aside because I'm going to start percolating,
Well, I'll say this just about Meatloaf and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm not sure if he belongs in as an artist or not. I'm going to put that to the side, but somewhere in the hall, there has to be a place for this album. There has to be a place. You can't go to the Hall of Fame and not see nothing about this album. It has to be.
That's a really good point. Because if there is an album that's groundbreaking, whatever, maybe that was the artist, but there should be an album Hall of Fame or top whatever. So that's a really, really good point. But I agree with you on that. I agree with you, on that.
You can't go there and not hear about the history of one of the greatest selling albums of all time. It has to be there. So, but I digress.
Yeah.
let's not get hung up on the Hall of Fame stuff. Anything else with Meatloaf that you think that we should bring up?
Well, I just I just think again it's always a difficult thing when you wake up in the morning and you hear about an artist. You know, he wasn't one of my, I'll openly admit, it's not one of my, favorite artists of all time. I own the record.
Yeah.
I mean, I had.
But you've said before,
I have
he's influenced some of your songwriting and all that,
of course,
right?
of course. And I just think it's a great story. I think his career, it's almost like a fairy tale kind of story that this guy who was like, looked at and like, are you out of your mind? We can't make this guy weighs 280 pounds, whatever he weighed, and put him on a record or put him on the stage. Or he doesn't, he doesn't look like, Glenn Fry and the Eagles, or he doesn't get this boyish good looks or whatever, And
to me, he always seemed appreciative of the success that he had, at least in all the interviews that I've seen with him. I always just got the impression, I could be wrong, but I always got that impression that he seemed very appreciative of that success.
Well, that's the thing I heard about him too, like that he was just a good dude, and I think he, like most artists, struggled with, probably some substance and stuff like that, and thing like that through the years, and maybe a lot of it is because you go through, you're on the highest of high, and then you're struggling for years after that to put out a record to get that success. You're chasing that. That's the curse of putting out a record like that and having something so iconic.
Yes.
Like, how do you match that?
It's almost impossible to do so. But then, like I said, in '93, he had his best-selling song of all time, which is incredible that he was able to match that success 15 years later. Incredible.
I remember thinking, even as a young kid, as a 9-year-old, when Michael Jackson, and I made no secret that Michael Jackson is one of my favorite artists of all time and highly influential for me, that when Off the Wall came out, and that was such a tremendous record, and it had so many hit songs off of it. And like, how do you follow it up? Oh, you follow it up with Thriller, right?
Right.
And then I remember Thriller was, for years. And then like when Bad was coming out, I was like, how are they ever, and it never sold as much as Thriller, but it still had a bunch of hit songs, but you can never, there's always going to be
almost impossible to duplicate that.
Right. You can't,
Yep.
It's got to be tough for artists when they talk about the sophomore jinx, right? How many records? Albums, with bands when they come out with their second album.
Agreed.
Even like Fleetwood Mac, when Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined them, because there was a Fleetwood Mac before those. They had that record.
I think that was the 9th lineup with Lindsey and Stevie.
Right.
The 9th of Fleetwood Mac. I'm not exaggerating. I think it was the 9th lineup, 7th or 9th.
Right.
I don't remember.
And it escapes you right now what the title of the 75-76 record was.
Right. Yeah.
That their first record, which had I think that had Rhiannon on it, and it had, but then they come out with Rumors, which if you look at that lineup, that was their sophomore record,
Right. Absolutely.
And again, one of the biggest records of all time,
Yep.
But
Well, I'll just say this. Like you said, Meatloaf was not your typical frontman singer with what did you say before, like the boyish good looks or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But he showed, if you stick with it and you believe in yourself, rock and roll dreams come true.
That's what you did there.
You see, it's one of my favorite songs of his. It's one of my favorite songs of his. And, whenever I heard that song, I used to think that, he proved you just stick with it and rock and roll dreams come true. I love that song.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
On that note, I think, as we always do, and like I said, I've listened to some of his music just a couple of weeks ago, not knowing that he'd be passing now, but go back, revisit some of those albums, Vin, that you mentioned before, right? I suggest people revisit some of those albums that maybe not as popular.
Yeah.
Certainly revisit, the classics, Bat Out of Hell, and some of the later Bat albums as well. Enjoy the music, watch one of the movies, that he was in, whatever it is. There's certainly a lot of Meatloaf stuff out there to celebrate his legacy and what he meant to music, movies, and just the entertainment industry in general.
Absolutely.
All right, buddy. I hate when we have to do these. It just reminds me, he was 74. It reminds me that our idols are all just getting older. And, just a couple of days ago, we were doing a Paul Stanley episode that he just turned 70. And that was one of the things I thought of this morning. I was like, wow, Meatloaf is 74. We were talking about how Stanley just turned 70. Gene's going to be 72 this year.
And
you never know.
And we should be, again, very thankful
Yes.
Because both Gene and Paul both had COVID, and they obviously beat it. So very thankful for that.
Absolutely. And you just, with all of these artists, none of them are getting any younger, and you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. So if you have the opportunity, go see them in concert, enjoy their music after they pass, but enjoy it also while they're here, because all of us are getting older and there's no guarantee what tomorrow brings. So,
and if you can, listen to it on vinyl.
Yes. Don't listen to it through your phone like I do, right?
Do not listen to it that way.
That's a whole separate topic of conversation. That's not normally the way I listen to music, but that's a different topic.
Don't even get me started.
Yeah, I won't get you started. So, all right, everybody. Thank you as always for watching, for listening. We say rest in peace to Meatloaf, and hopefully you and Jim are writing that next hit song Up in Heaven. Thank you for the memories. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
Later, everybody.
Later.
All righty. Once again, our condolences to Meatloaf's family, friends, and all of his fans around the world. Thank you, Meatloaf, for the wonderful memories in both music and movies. You certainly will never be forgotten. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. If you're listening to one of my podcasts, subscribe over there as well. Also, head on over to Facebook and follow my page, The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn, where each and every day we talk about all the rock and roll music that you love. You could also follow me on Instagram and Twitter as well. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you all next time.